giving lectures or having a museum and things. I don't make a living doing that. So I can afford to write for one race of people. If others buy it, okay, so be it. But the message is not for them, it's for us as a people. So I'm putting it out there. If an individual can use it, fine. They can't, walk away from it. Without argument.
Let me ask you this. I looked at the film that Clemson gave me. I'm just getting over a cold, so I'm a little noisy.
Okay.
And a lot of the stuff you said, I'm in complete agreement. Right?
Okay.
I view history a little different in that I view history from a working class perspective.
Okay.
I see myself, not just as an African American, but a working class African American. So I try to view history on the whole historical development of humankind. And in so doing that, you got to see where man came from, where he's at, and different stages he went through economically. And I try to say in my own construction that man has went through like 9 levels of human development economically, from the individual to the family, to the clan, to the tribe, to the city-state, to the feudal state, to the bourgeois state, to the socialist state, all the way up to the communist state, which we haven't even reached yet. But in doing that, I try to view history from an African-centered, I call myself an Afrocentric, proletarian, working class Marxist, pantheist, okay? Meaning that I see nature and God as one, spiritually, meaning that I do all of history from what we call a dialectical perspective, and I see all history as a struggle between classes that lead to change. This don't mean I don't see racism. Racism exists, but is a subterfuge for underneath class struggle. I see all wars as class struggle with arms. I see all politics as the art and science for class struggle without it. So when I look at historical development, I look at the whole human condition, whites, blacks, and all, and the role we played and the role that they played. I didn't know I'd be talking this bad today. I wasn't talking this bad yesterday. So,
You're talking bad. I don't think you're talking bad.
Huh?
I don't think you're talking bad.
all right. So what, no, my voice don't sound right even to me. So what I'm saying is, I try to say for people to understand that I'm Afrocentric, but I'm also a Marxist. And I'm also a pantheist. Meaning, historically, I look at the whole world from an African-centered point of view. Economically and politically, I look at it from a working class point of view. And spiritually, I look at nature and God as being one.
Okay, when you say you look at the world from an African
Centered point of view.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I look at all of human development from an African-centered out. That all history must come back to Africa. In other words, that's the sum of all things. Everything started there and branched out from there and migrated out of there. And everything is central to Africa, is central to everything else. Everything else is the limbs, and Africa would be the trunk, or the root in the trunk, right? So I'm Afrocentric in that sense, not Afrocentric, Afrocentric. There's no such continent, no such name of a continent, Africa, it's Africa. Okay, so if we're going to be African-centered, it's got to be Afrocentric, not Afro.
Afro is a hairstyle.
That's exactly what it is, at most. Okay. But it's used by petty bourgeois scholars,
Okay.
and they use it to soften the blow to white acceptance.
See, that's the reason why I don't make a living doing this. So therefore I can tell the truth as I see it. And whoever, someone gets hurt doing, and so me doing that, then there's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
Either I told the truth
They
or
don't
you
control your thoughts and your
right,
research.
because I'm not making money off you. I don't want to be your leader.
Okay.
I don't want you following me. Hello there.
Hi, how you doing?
I don't want to be your leader. I don't want you following me. I don't want any of your money. See, so therefore, I have no hidden agenda for you. I can either tell you the truth as I see it, or because I'm not going to tell you a lie. So therefore, I'll tell you nothing before I tell you a lie. And if you don't understand that, then there's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to excuse me if I'm going to use the washroom.
Yeah, I got to do it. scholar all my life. I finished high school and I didn't get a scholarship to go to college, so I signed up to go in the Air Force. When I got out of the Air Force, I used the GI Bill to learn tool and die maker. I make my living as a tool and die maker. And a machinist. And then when I came to New York this time, after I got hurt, I had to leave the country for a while, go up to Canada for a little while, came back in. I moved to the Lower East Side. I took a job at the city as a carpenter, and I retired as a carpenter foreman on bridges. So for the last 28 years, I was on bridges.
Being a carpenter.
Yeah, carpenter foreman. Well, the last 11 years, I was a foreman.
Oh, okay, great.
But all of my scholarly work was done basically from a working class perspective. Not on, I spoke at leading colleges in the East. I used to be one of the chief spokesmen for the Black Panther Party in Jersey and Massachusetts, places like that in the Northeast. So I came to the conclusion that most of the scholars that I had met, they call themselves historians, had no real understanding of history, because the whole key to understanding history is economics, and they left economics out completely. So as I began to,
How do you mean by that, Mr. Nichols, when you say the whole key to understanding history is economics?
well, economics is the motivating force for history.
Why
All
do you
history
say
is
that?
motivated by,
Why do you say that is what I'm trying to say.
I say that because there cannot be no history without economics.
Why? That's what I'm trying to...
Because economics is how people move to carry on their production and their consumption, their trade, their commerce, their government, their culture, their spirituality. It all has an economic base. And when I say 9 levels of human development, I'm talking about an economic base for each level of human development. From the time we were individuals to the time we were families, clans, tribes, city-states, each one of them had a different economic base,
I got you.
right? So if you don't understand the economics of a people, you can't understand the politics. And if you don't understand the politics, you're completely out of it. So when I, no, you know, I'm going to go ahead.
Thank you.
Will introduce this then. Brothers and sisters in panel, I hope that you all had an opportunity to hear, the tape that we played a little earlier. You heard it yesterday in the car. I played it this morning when we went out. It's a search for a correction to our history, trying to put a piece together that our young people can look at, and the questions that they ask all the time can be addressed. But it was set kind of a framework for us to understand who we are, where we come from, how we got to be where we are, what were the factors involved in the historical developments that brought us from one of the most dynamic people in history, not one of the most, the most dynamic people in history, from pyramids to projects. So I wanted, that's just a general overview. I've been taking some classes with Nick, so I'm just going to ask him to kind of go over some of the lessons that we have had, that the systems that you have laid out for us in how to walk us through this history. I give to you, introduce to you, Brother Carl Nichols, deep and profound historian.
Good evening. I would like to start out by saying why I'm here. Clifton Brown is a very good friend of mine, and he told me that Professor Walter Williams would be here and wanted me to meet him. And in the meantime, Clifton and I had been going over some theories that I had developed on how we should view history and how history can be used as a tool toward liberation. My whole interest in history is how can it be used to liberate us as a people, African Americans, African, and all other people throughout the world. So over the years, say for the last 35 or 40 years, I've been trying to read and study and decipher everything I can lay my hand on to come up with a common theory and a common ideology that could unify us and at the same time give us a major view of history where the dumbest ones of us could grapple with the whole historical development of humankind. And in doing so, I came to the conclusion that all of the history that we've been taught has been lies. The first thing we have to do is divest ourselves of everything we've been taught and relearn our history, refine it, and reconstruct it, and use self-determination to teach it, as a tool of liberation. Now, history in a vacuum is no good. Most of our college-trained historians are very weak at history because they leave the economic fact out. All of them, the best of them, talk history without economics. They talk about slavery without talking about capitalism. You can't do that. When you talk about any form of history, you got to know the period of what was the economic order of the world at that time. If you talk about the rise of capitalism, you got to start talking about 1400 all the way up to now. And what happened at that period? If you're talking about Jesus Christ, you got to be talking about the human level of what we call slaveocracy. So I developed a theory that I call 9 stages of human development. Starting with the first stage, when Homo sapien became Homo sapien and formed the individual, and the individual to the family, from the family to the clan, from the clan to the tribe, from the tribe to the city-state, from the city-state to the feudal state, from the feudal state to the bourgeois state, to the socialist state, all the way to the communist state. We're talking about whole levels of human development. And this is independent of Carl Nichols or anybody else. This is the human wave of how humanity grows. And we have to see that humanity grow through class struggles. Now, when we say, what do you mean by class struggle? A war is a class struggle with guns. When things cannot be resolved in no other way, the oppressor got his foot on the back of the slave got no other way up, he got to kill him. That's a class struggle with guns. Now, politics is the art and science of class struggle without guns. So when we begin to see the whole layout of human development, what we begin to see is that human development can be put under a microscope, just like any germ, and be dissected, harnessed, controlled, and make it move in the way that you want it. I consider myself an Afrocentric Marxist, meaning by that I look at the whole world from an African-centered point of view, but I use Marxist science as dialectics to decipher everything that confront me. I use that as a yardstick. Religiously or spiritually speaking, I consider myself a pantheist. I see nature and God as being the same thing. I don't see God as being no man, white or black, green or blue. I see a mighty force called nature, and if you can unlock nature's secrets, you can look God dead in the face. So when we begin to talk about history, we got to see what is the purpose of history. Is history supposed to serve a purpose to put us in touch with our past so we can know our present and then see which direction we want to go and how we can use it as a tool for liberation? On the basis of that, I say history have had 9 levels of human development. From the time Homo sapien came into being, stopping with prehistory, we went from the individual to the family, to the clan, to the tribe, to the city-state, to the feudal state, to the bourgeois state, to the socialist state, to the communist state. All of these are levels of human development, and most of them, we're at the level 7 now. So if we're going to free ourselves, we have to master what level human level 7 is. And human level 7 is the whole period of the rise of capitalism. We can never understand history unless we understand the role that the slave trade played in the development of capitalism. On the basis of that, if you want to ask any questions that's relative to that, I'm more than willing to take it.
That was real short. It didn't really get into any of the niche. So let me ask you some questions, Don. What were the, let's look at, I think we will start at the fall of the Roman Empire. I want to take Egypt as a separate entity and just deal with Egypt by itself. But while I'm with you, Carl, I want to begin in that period at the Roman Empire. Let's say the Greeks. We'll go back a little further. What were the elements that brought the Greeks into?
Well, if you're talking the Roman Empire or any of the city-states, the Greek Empire, the Roman, or the Persians, we have to see that whole stage as economically slaveocracy. That would be 1, 2, 3. That would be the 5th level of human development. It's called slaveocracy, meaning that one group of people will come in, conquer another group of people, and take them all back as slaves, and use that slave labor to work and make money and power for them. Before I go any further, let me say one thing. We've been so miseducated in America, and what confuses us is the foundation of economics. We've been taught that economics is supply and demand. The basic law of economics is supply and demand. The basic law of all economics is land and labor. And the day you understand land and labor, all the rest of it go out the window. You see, if you show me a free people, they have to have some land. And it is land and labor that creates wealth. It's wealth that creates power. And when we begin to look at history from that perspective, we can begin to see that every king, emperor, anything else, and trace what he did and why he did it. There's nothing magical about it from that point on. So when we start talking about the acquisition of land and labor, that's what it's all about. Let's look at American capitalism. When we look at American capitalism, we begin to find out that Europeans that came here didn't have no money. But there were banks in Italy and some other parts of Europe that was willing to finance the voyage. But that voyage had to be paid back. The white folks that came here didn't have no money. But when they were financed, after they ruled down the coast of Africa, they saw sugar cane growing wild in Africa. At that time, there was no sugar in Europe. The Europeans looking for explore the spice world, the world of spices, is what led to the slave trade. Okay? So when we look at the slave trade, we got to look at what was the economics of Europe at the time. Europeans was eating plain food, and they wanted salt, pepper, all kind of spices and sugar. As they went down the west coast of Africa, they saw it. As they crossed the Atlantic and saw the Indians, here's the Indians over here, he got all this land in the Caribbean, he don't have no guns, and we can grow sugar cane in the Caribbean and the Arab have no control over it. So the slave trade gave rise to killing the Indian, which is free land, enslaving the African, free labor, taking the sugar cane from West Africa to the Caribbean and drying up. So the whole foundation of the money making of capitalism came with sugar cane in the slave fields of the Caribbean. When we begin to see history in that light, we begin to attach economics to it. And once you begin to see economics, there's no good people and bad people no more. It's the economic laws of development that makes the world go the way it is now. And if you don't understand that, you will never be free. That is the whole key, is economics. When you trace economics to history, you'll find out that economics unfold all things that history has hidden. So when we look at capitalism, we look at what? The slave trade, the sugar cane, later on cotton, later on tobacco. But remember, when you got 300 people that work for you for nothing all their life, they don't make nothing but profit. That's power. People don't give that up. They're not about to give it up. So when we begin to see what is really happening, we begin to see economics. And economics is not just supply and demand, it's land and labor. Nothing on earth creates wealth but land and labor. Everything on earth comes from the earth, and without human labor, it wouldn't be nothing. This used to be an earth natural product that we can consume. So when we start putting economics to history, then we begin to make history unfold and make it relative to people, and people hold on to it.
Perhaps you can explain the phases of
The what?
The phases of mercantile. Before you get to capitalism, you had mercantile.
Well, capitalism, when we look at capitalism, we got to see capitalism that went through roughly about 6 or 7 stages of development. Capitalism came into the world basically around the 13th to 14th century. In the 13th, 14th century, you begin to have houses in Florence, Venice, and Genoa that was financing overland expeditions to China and India for the spice and the silk routes. Marco Polo would be one that might come to mind. But these houses that began to develop in Italy at the time began to finance voyages. And as the Arabs and the Persians and the Turks cut off their route to the Indies and to the spice and trade and silk routes, they had to look for a sea route. Columbus was looking for a sea route to India and China when he discovered America. So when he discovered America, he'd already been down the west coast of Africa and saw the sugar cane and all of the vegetation that's growing in Africa and how it could be transported to the Caribbean. So when he went back to Spain, he called it in the name of Spain, put up a flag, and said, we got some free land. We got children down there, Indians, and they don't have no guns. We got guns. So the white man came with his horse and his gun. He killed them. He took the land. He bought the sugar cane first, and then he bought the African slaves later. So when we begin to see slavery, we got to see it in the context of how much money it made for Western civilization. All of Western civilization was made off the ruin and the destruction of Africa and the non-European world. And if we don't put economics to history, we're just talking history in a vacuum. So we must learn to start putting economics to history. The first stage of capitalism was mercantile. The second stage was agriculture. The third stage was industrial. The fourth stage,
Go back to mercantilism. That's the question we put to you.
Well, let me lay them out.
Define mercantilism.
Okay, let me lay them out.
What was the mode of trade before mercantilism came?
Huh?
What was the main mode of trade worldwide before mercantilism came into being? I think you have
The main mode of trade was the barter system, but I was giving a presentation. I wanted to lay them out so we can deal with them a little later.
question to define. You talk about mercantilism. You have
So We would say the mercantile stage of capitalism lasted from, say, the 14th to the 17th century. The 17th century, we go into the agriculture slave form of capitalism where they needed slave labor and need free Indian land. Okay. Then after they start getting free Indian land in African labor, then they wanted to mechanize it so they could get more. So we went to the industrial stage. Then the industrial stage required the colonization of Africa because they needed the natural resources and raw materials of Africa to bring back to the finishing product plants of England and France to make products and finished goods to dump on the African market. So as the Africans began to rise up against colonialism, they removed the old white colonial general and put up a black guy there who studied at Sandhurst and came up with neocolonialism. And from neocolonialism in certain places like America, we went to imperialism. So we went from mercantile to agriculture to industrial to colonialism to neocolonialism to imperialism. These are all stages of economic development. To talk history without understanding these things is a waste of time.
Okay. He's right. I did want to look at mercantilism, what gave rise to it, in terms of why bankers developed, how they developed, what were the circumstances.
Well, what happened, let's look at the early stage when we first began to enter the capitalist stage. Let's look at the city of Genoa, let's look at Venice, let's look at Florence. I'm sorry I got this cold. I was going to have this yesterday. What we begin to see is a bunch of houses begin to come together, like the house of the Medici, and they would begin to form small banks, and these banks would pay different travelers to go overland to China or to India or to Persia to bring back goods. But the Arabs and the Turks waylaid them and took everything. By the time they got to India or China, they were broke. So what happened is this mercantile stage began to see that, look, we got to look for a different way. But the banking structure of the mercantile system stayed intact. Capitalism started with the formation of the banking system.
How did that happen?
Huh?
How did that happen?
How did what happen?
If you're going to deal with mercantilism again, how did banks come into being? What made it possible? How did money, first minted coins, replace barter? If we're going to deal with mercantilism, we have to get into that aspect of it. And it really wasn't begun by the Europeans either. Mm. No, what I'm saying is we're looking at a banking structure. You basically what you're saying is correct, but you're leaving out, I think, some very important factors.
That's why
you had to work out a system. You had to work out an accounting system to make money replace barter, right?
Right.
So these are very important things we have to deal with. I got involved in an investment club with black people for the purpose of trying to expound the small money, $30 a month. How this system worked. We don't know how it worked. Most people here don't know how the system we live in works. We don't really know what a bank is. We know you can deposit money in it, and it gives you a tiny percentage return on what you deposit. But how did this structure begin? Let's go back to Africa again. What did the Portuguese and Spaniards find besides sugarcane long before they knew what to do with it along the coast of Africa? What did they find? Gold, right?
They found gold, yeah.
Gold. So what did they do with this gold? Was this not the key then to although it already started before the Portuguese ever went down the west coast of Africa, the banking structure? But that expanded it by leaps and bounds. Is that correct?
That's true.
So these merchant classes then could pay to outfit ships and have seamen on it to go in search of land, some that they heard about, didn't know about, largely through the Arabs and others, right?
They told them there was land to the west.
We also find, as we use Van Sertima and some of the others, that African seamen had come to what we call America, a misnamed continent, right? And that sailing in this direction, Columbus had no more than compass. He didn't have one at the time. It was chance, stars, and so forth to find its way there. So then back to the structure of how money began to replace barter. I think that's key. We have to delve into. I didn't really want to cut you off, but I think, since you have...
No, that's okay. I think we're all...
That was the reason.
I think at this time we can all...
That is the reason I mean.
Merchants, merchants were around long before money came into being, right? Caravans, they may travel by horse, they may travel by boat or camel, depending on the land lay or the waters for trade. But the largest was barter, right? You mentioned something like salt, very important. They had to work out an equation, how much salt for what you had in another area that I wanted, right?
Right.
I mean, before we came up with a money structure, a banking structure, But that could not evolve into a banking structure without a kind of a currency. I believe first it was minted coins, right? Not paper. When it reached the paper level, you had to have accountants that had worked out a structure of some form of what they considered to be equation, which is what we're living under today, right? But at this early stage. So I think the finding of gold became a key thing that catapulted us, for example, for being here in North America today, as a people that has never been free here in North America. The gold, from what I have read from sources, largely, one thing I like about what he said in his projection, Europeans have wrote the history we have been taught. We haven't written it. There was history there, but they took it and they converted it in what they said was objective or correct, not us. When I watched your tape, that was a key thing that stuck in my mind, what you had to say about history. What we're reading about people's history, African people's history, is what Europeans said.
Correct.
About the world history, we're reading about what Europeans said. We're not reading about what the Chinese said,
Right.
Africans, any other people. The
Correct.
European gave his version of what he claims to be history.
Correct.
But you can unravel it, I feel, if we dig deep into it. Your economic projection, I think, is very correct. How we make a living. You know, I had someone to say to me, we are taught history here on the basis of what? Names, places, and dates. And the in-between is left out.
And good and bad guys.
Yeah, that's right. This great king, that great queen, this great general, etc. But what gave rise to these people? What's the underlying factor? We all have to make a living, right? I heard this brother say, he said, look, I'm not depending on what I say to make a living on it. Therefore, I think you don't have to accept what I say, but I think I can be more honest that way.
Correct.
So I like that.
So that's why I'm
Don't
here
stop
today,
now.
because of that. Other than that, I wouldn't be here today.
Going back.
Well, I would say that the goal was not a modern thing. Goal as something to be attractive was at least 1325 when Mansa Musa traveled across the continent from ancient Mali straight across to Mecca. And at that time, he contacted with enough Europeans so that the gold that he had was so much, huge nuggets, you know, the size of his head practically. And it upset the European market. I agree when it comes to the land and labor, because when you look at ancient Egypt, and even before the pre-dynastic times, it was the concept of nomes, where you would carry the standard, place it down, and designate this is my land, or this is our land, the land of the group.
The nomarch.
Yes, and so thus they developed this idea of estates. The owner of estates and the groups that own a state, and how many noma can work together when you saw them in procession in the pre-dynastic art and the early arts. I know we are the elephant, you know,
Totally
we are the various totem poles that were carried. But the warfare idea we can see in the Norma palette. That's a war document. It has the war captives, and it has people, without their heads lined up, those that were killed, and also with the arms bound in the back, those that they collected. And so obviously, what was that war about? It was about land, because you had the beginnings of the drying of the Sahara, and so thus people were moving from the Sahara into the Nile area. Why? Because the Nile was water, it was desirable, the Nile would overflow its banks, and so whoever controlled the Nile areas, the Nile nomes, the Nile estates, controlled the wealth and the power. So that when there were people that were bound as captives, we can say too, we as a black people were the people to originate all of these systems. We originated things in reference to the land and also the labor, but also elementary aspects of probably what was slavery in the form of war captives. And yet we can never say that it had any prisoners of war, right, had anything to do with the later slaving systems that developed in more recent times. And it's not comparable, because you're talking about a global order where whites globally went in operations to build huge forts and dungeons, etc., and to around the world, not just in one place, but around the world, and thus would come. So out of that capital came culture. So the essence of culture, we can still say, is linked to the economics. because you would not, all of it is. You would not have Rembrandt painting what? What was Rembrandt painting? He was painting the gills, the cloth maker's guild, and all of these are wealthy, various groups, etc. And where did these guilds arise? Because of the slave trade. So in essence, you can rattle off the names of the Renaissance painters, the Van Eycks, and you mentioned the Medici family, who supported what? Michelangelo. And so the House of Medici and was, once again, patterned because it was a house, and the meaning of the word pharaoh is house.
Big house.
House, big house, right. Dynasty means family of rulers.
Family of rulers.
Right, families of rulers. So that in essence we developed first the system of the house of, and of course the Bible later on said the house of Boaz, the house of David, the house of the various ones. So the house system was one that we started and operated. And so it's a matter of going back, looking at the things, and then, but even before that, in the cave art, we can see that there must have been battles over land. Because why in the world, at this early date, when you have oogums of land everywhere, would you see in cave art the battles?
You're right. Let me add something to what she's saying. I'm total agreement with you.
Yes. So I'm just saying that we are the people to solve the problem of the century because we started.
But we have to put economics to our history to do it.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's the point I'm trying to make. Long as well, but let's look at what she's saying. We're talking about these houses, like whether you call it the house of David or the house of Saul.
Yes.
These houses were our first financial institution. They were the people with the power.
That's it.
It's nothing on this earth that don't come, nothing in this world that don't come from this earth through labor. Nothing. Nothing on earth create wealth but labor and land. Nothing. Okay? So when we see anything, we begin to see that power comes from wealth. Wealth comes from profit. Profits come from products. Products come from property. Property comes from the marriage of land to labor. That's the foundation of all economics.
Okay, I have to interject here. I don't agree with putting slavery and the capture of people and putting them into a slave servitude on our ancestors, ancient Egyptians. If you go back into antiquity, ancient times, you'll find that the ancient Egyptians had no armies or any jails. Didn't have to. So you cannot civilize the whole entire world and then destroy other people or put people into slavery. To prove that, you can go to any museum or institution that displays ancient Egyptian artifacts. You will never ever find war weapons on display being attached to ancient Egypt. They had no jails simply because they did not have a corrupt government to put people in jail. That's not their thinking. Armies, warring, enslavement of people is an European institution. You have to put it back into Europe, give it back to the enslaver. You see? So the ancient Egyptians went around the whole entire world, civilizing this whole planet. That no one can deny. And in order to do that, you have to have a high level of civilization and knowledge yourself that is steeped into a spiritual realm of thinking. Okay? So therefore, you cannot civilize people and then bust them upside the head at the same time, or cut off their culture, take something from them. There's no record or no evidence of the ancient Egyptians ever going around the world destroying other races of people. They just didn't do that. So don't bring that into the conversation and with our ancient Egyptian ancestors as being enslavers. Now, Dr. Jeffries mentioned the normal palette. The normal palette is part of the chronology of ancient Egypt. Okay? The normal palette was created at the University of Chicago during the time of James Henry Breasted, who had created the Oriental Institute with the financial help of the Rockefellers. Okay?
So you're saying that they made the palette
Yes, ma'am.
themselves? They made the palette.
I'm going to tell you why. Yes, they did.
They made the palette.
That's right. the ancient Egyptians never wrote a chronology of themselves. That chronology was created by the Europeans so they can control the culture, the civilization, and the subject of ancient Egypt. They did that, okay?
Still doing it.
And they're still doing it today, okay? So what I'm saying is that I have two forms of chronologies in my possession. One was came out of a book that was printed in 1867 or 68. They say that the first pharaoh was Mesram, and in parentheses they put Menez in there, okay? Now Mesram is the son of Ham in biblical literature, the grandson of Noah, belonging to what is known as the family and table of nations. You cannot use anything coming from the Bible to establish truth or true world history.
I love that.
Okay, so that's a misnomer there. That's a no-no. Okay, so now they said in this book about the chronology of ancient Egypt that the first dynasty that came about was 1200 BCE. This is what they said, the first dynasty.
No, 3100 BC.
No. Let me get to where I'm going.
You talking about Narmer and Menez?
No, I'm not talking about that. I said,
okay.
See, in the book, I'm talking about the 1867, 1868 chronology that's in this particular book. And then I'm going to go on. It is said that the first dynasty was 1200 BCE, started by Mesram. And you see, the chronology of ancient Egypt as it's written today is written based on biblical literature. This is what the Europeans did. Okay? Now, let's modulate and get into the turn of the century. When the turn of the century came about, you had a man by the name of James Henry Breasted from the University of Chicago and a German scholar by the name of Edward Meyer creating a new chronology, you see? And then they cut out Mesram. They kept Menez in there, but they put another name in front of Menez, says Narmer Menez, and created a palette for that. Narmer Menez palette. Narmer smiting his enemy. You see? They made that palette at the University of Chicago. The chronology of ancient Egypt was not written by our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, nor have there ever been a Manetho. There's never been a Manetho. Manetho is just a name that the Europeans, an incarnated name that the Europeans used to write through. This is one of their tricks. They said, well, we're getting this chronology that we're presenting from a native Egyptian by the name of Manetho. Okay? Manetho is supposed to have existed and lived in the 2nd century BC. Supposed to have been around during the time.
BC.
No. 2nd century.
The CA dates would be from 243 to 287, which going backward would be 3 instead of 2. Think about it.
I'm thinking about it now. Okay. He was around during the time of Ptolemy II. Ptolemy II Philadelphia's.
Ptolemy II Philadelphia's 291.
Okay. 291.
You got it.
287.
287, 291.
Yeah, I stand corrected. You're absolutely right.
And let me agree with you on one thing before you go any further. Your concept of incarnation is the greatest I've ever seen. How they incarnate people.
Thank you.
That is the greatest layout I've ever seen. And I want you to know I know that.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah. Thank you for that correction. You're right. It was the 3rd century with Ptolemy II Philadelphia's 287.
Right.
Now it's supposed to have been a Manetho around, and he's supposed to have went to Manetho to ask Manetho for a history on his people, the ancient Egyptians. And this Manetho is supposed to have, let's say, constructed
32 dynasties. Yeah.
and put in these particular dynasties. That's not true. Okay? Because why it's not true? Because the dynastic period or the chronology of ancient Egypt is based on biblical literature, and there was no Bibles or anything around at that time, nor any religion around at that time to connect it to. So don't put slavery and attach it to our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians. Then another thing I want to say to Mr. Nichols is this. I agree with you about it was paper money that came in the 13th century. That's where, you see...
Marco Polo brought it back in China.
No. It was, it came from the Lombards.
Okay.
Okay, the Lombards
Stand corrected.
out of North Italy. Okay, they began a currency, a paper money. Okay, you see, your kings were sitting up there with coin money, a precious metal, as they want to call it, which is gold and silver. You see, and they were controlling everything. So the Lombards was being pushed around because they were your barons, your feudal land owners, et cetera, et cetera. So now what happened was that they changed the money and the money system on the king. See, they're sitting up there, this is fat and rich, this gold and silver, and they came out with paper money.
I agree.
Okay? And they started what is known as a banking system with a usury tax added to that. It started by the Lombards in the north of Italy, and then they, the second place, they came into the south of France with it and started the banking system. So those two things I want to bring to everyone's attention.
I had kind of tried to include all of that into what I call mercantile capitalism. And you are right on probably the date and place. But from what I can understand, it's like when you came up with the concept of how incarnation take place, all of the times I have been reading history, I've seen a lot of incarnation. I couldn't put my finger on them at the time. Okay? But once I saw the way you laid it out, I knew you were right. And that's why I would subject the whole concept of Manetto to incarnation too. Because when he lays out the 32 dynasties of Egypt, how could that be? And nobody can find no trace or burial place of none of Manetto.
They don't have it. It's an incarnated name.
Right.
See, if you read a book called The History of Egypt by James Henry Breslin on page 24, he says that we, talking about the Europeans, possess no history of ancient Egypt by a native Egyptian. He said the word purely means childish, silly, and trivial. History that Manetho gave cannot be used. You see, so, and then he goes on to apologize for not having enough information to write about ancient Egypt, but what he did write on in his book, which is 634 pages, but that was a chronology of ancient Egypt that he and others had created. You see, talking about the Hyksos and the first pharaoh of Egypt and so forth. There's never been any Hyksos invasion of ancient Egypt. See, that's a misnomer, you know, and so forth and so on. So these things we have to look into and investigate closely on a historical basis.
Well, this is the first time I'm hearing that the normal palette was created by Europeans. The first time I'm hearing this. What other, and I'm open to listening to all points of view, what other major works do you think that we're looking at, trying to interpret, that comes from European trickery creation, yes. Because when I look at, the Ramesses II murals, and I do see that they were in battles, and so we feel as if there were battles that took place, and we look at some of the early images in the tombs, and where they were carrying weapons, and we know that certain ones we feel might have been in battles, and others were purely symbolic, like we know in Benin. We see all kinds of swords that they're carrying, but they were never meant to be used to kill anyone, because some of them had blunted edges or little lacy, furry patterns on where the blade should be, and so we know that it was a sword meant to be an internal state of mind, you know, of protection. So are there other major works other than the normal palette that you feel, or that we think are major works that are trickery?
Well, you see, you mentioned Ramesses. The question I always ask people is this: did the ancient Egyptians say that was Ramesses, or did white folks say that was Ramesses? Now, when
I thought it might have been in the hieroglyphics on the cartouche.
well, see, the hieroglyphics has never been deciphered.
Hieroglyphics have never
Never
been
what makes
deciphered.
Never been deciphered. See,
Okay.
And I have that as an appendix.
Well,
to
see,
my
these
book.
are whole new points of view, new things
Yeah,
that
see,
I have
what-
never
what-
heard.
what-
you
what
know?
made it
so that's
interesting-
why I'm eager to listen.
For me to come here and talk with you is all of my resource is based on things that you said don't exist. And you may be right, because I
Same
found
here.
many lies. So I'm open, okay?
I'm open too.
I'm open. But I was told that Champollion had deciphered the Rosetta Stone and laid the foundation to decipher the whole of our hieroglyphs.
No.
Now, I have a friend of mine here in New York named Joe Mack. You probably know Joe Mack, right?
I know it.
Joe Mack, okay. Now, I have a friend named Joe Mack that teaches a lot of black middle-class kids that can afford it, parents that can afford it, how to read the whole hieroglyph.
A lot of people are doing it. A lot of our Afro-centric centered scholars are doing that, and that's a misnomer. They shouldn't do this. The hieroglyphics, and I wrote it in my book called The Historical Origin of Christianity in the appendix section, that the hieroglyphics meta-nature has never been deciphered. The reason being is this: in order for those symbols that our ancestors created and drew during the time of antiquity in Egypt, one will have to ask the ones that drew those symbols what he or she meant for them to be. And nobody was around to ask that question. That's number one. Number two, you cannot put a phonetic value, such as an alphabet, to symbols, because a symbol tells you something to do. The third thing is that I'm assuming that we all drive and have driver's license. When you went down to take your driver's test, you were tested in 3 categories: rules of the road, eyesight, and symbols. When you got to the symbol part, they did not ask you to put an alphabet to that symbol. They asked you the meaning of that symbol. You see that? So what I'm saying is that a symbol is something that one has to know the meaning of it. And the only way that you can find the meaning of the hieroglyphics is that you have to ask the ancient Egyptian who drew that symbol what he or she meant for it to be. So like I can draw a symbol. I have it in my book, in the appendix section of the Historical Origin of Christianity. I drew a symbol that I created, and I'm asking the reader, do you know the meaning of this symbol? Quite naturally, they don't know. If you want to know the meaning of the symbol, you have to ask Walter Williams. I drew the symbol. See? Now, you can't assume what this symbol is saying, or the meaning of this symbol. You have to know. So, Champollion, in 1822, supposed to have came out with theories that's supposed to have deciphered our ancient Egyptian ancestors' hieroglyphs. But the European community did not accept his theories, okay? Nor did they accept Thomas More and Ackerblad and so forth and so on. 44 years later, they supposed to have found another bilingual stone called the Stone of Canopus, okay? And this was supposed to have convinced the Europeans that Champollion was right. And you go and get a book called The Rosetta Stone, written for the British Museum by Carol Andrews. And I got her quoted in my appendix, in my chapter or appendix in my Historical Origin of Christianity book. She says, strictly speaking, you cannot put a phonetic alphabetical value to symbols. And she goes on to say that the Europeans, is doing this for index purposes, catalog purposes, and academic purposes, where they can control our ancestors' supposed decipherment of the hieroglyphs. You got to go to white people if you want to know the meaning of these symbols. White folks have worked out a system, and this is what she is saying. Now, let's go a little further. How can you take 400 or more ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and reduce them down to 26 letters of the English alphabet? Can't do it. Okay? Now, using the 26 letters of the English alphabet, if you formulate the 26 letters of the English alphabet into words, you can only get 250, not to exceed 275,000 words out of the 26 letters of the English alphabet. Okay? Now, if you are going to use that same analogy with the hieroglyphs, like I said before, you got 400 or more hieroglyphics, then that will go up into the millions. You see that?
Let's look at it in a different approach. Let's look at the Egyptian language itself.
You can't look at the, what do you call the Egyptian language now?
Yeah,
Listen,
for everything I've read, maybe all the books I read is good. I've been no good. Right?
Well, I'll put it like
But I'm
this.
just talking about what I was able to put together.
Well, when you said Egyptian language, you have to, have you ever heard the spoken language that the ancient Egyptians spoke during the time of antiquity?
How
That's
could
what
I
I said.
when it have 3,000 years
Well, that's
ago?
what I say. So don't say Egyptian language now, because no one have ever heard this
Well,
spoken sound.
let me restate it.
Okay.
Let's say the alleged language that was put down to us in books that's supposed to be
You
Egyptian.
can't
Okay.
say alleged language. Now,
But he can say Metanetia.
he can say the symbols. He can say the hieratic demotic. He can say the phonetic alphabet. Of
Well, that's what I was
Egyptian.
getting ready to
You
lay
can
out.
do that, but don't put it as a language. Put it as a script or even an alphabet or a form of writing. That's what we have to do. Not a language, because no one has ever heard the sound of the ancient Egyptian language spoken. Okay, go ahead.
So, like, if we can't deal with it as a language, how do we deal with archaic, hieratic, Dometic, and Coptic?
In what way? How are you going to use it? It's according to how you use it.
For communication. People's language is to communicate.
This is okay. As long as you know the language, as long as it's still been spoken, and it's by way of communicating an idea, conversation, or et cetera, you can use a language to do that. But if you have never heard the sound of a language, let's say spoken by the ancient Egyptians, then you have no idea how that language is spoken. But now if you have languages spoken today, that's a different ballgame.
Okay, let's try this method. When Champollion said he had deciphered the Rosetta Stone, he said he traced it back from Cyrillic, which is Greek, into Coptic. Coptic is half Greek, half Egyptian, into Dometic, and into hieratic, right? But he's going from 1 point forward, 1 point backward in deciphering the stone. Now, what you're saying, that the stone was never deciphered, everything we know about Egypt is no good.
But then I can't help that. I have to tell you the truth. Now,
But
First,
there are
first,
certain
first.
basic things that must have been the case. In other words, if we, from the cartouche of a name,
Right.
and we know that
Or the
this
five
is the
names of
name,
the
and every
cartouche.
time we see they're talking about this person, so you can say you have the names, you can have entitlements, you know, of, because we know the entitlements because they were on people and on the statues of certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of like surmise that these, you know, so names, places, you know, names, places, and then perhaps determinatives of the little drawn picture on the end of a sequence to let you know that this is what is being talked about. You
Okay.
know, so that maybe those things we can just about guarantee, even if we can't guarantee the detail of the the writing.
Okay, here's what I'm saying about language. And both of you have brought language into the decipherment of the hieroglyphics. If you don't know the meaning of the symbol, then how can you apply a language to the meaning of that symbol? You don't know the meaning of the symbol.
Let's look at the last stage of Egyptian Coptic, right? Let's look at the last stage of their development.
Okay.
We would say that the Egyptian language changed like every 1,000 years.
Wait now, hold it.
Roughly from a historical perspective.
Mr. Nichols, let's go back, like I
We're
said.
talking about the evolution of
No,
things.
no, here. Let's go back. If you do not know the meaning of the symbol, you cannot apply a language to it. If you see, a question mark, for instance, everybody know the symbol of the question mark. If a German, speaking German, saw that symbol of the question mark, he'll say in German, a question mark. Okay? If a Greek see the symbol of the question mark, he'll use his language, say, oh, in Greek, speaking or spoken, he said that's a question mark. And the same thing with any language, but you have to know the meaning of the symbol. If you don't know the meaning of the symbol, you can't tell me the meaning of it by using the language. What language are you going to use when you don't know the meaning of it?
In other words, if an Australian Aborigine saw the question mark, he would not know what it meant.
I said, I'm assuming that this person is trained in understanding
right.
that this is a question mark. Then he can use his own basic language and say, oh, that's a question, whatever he speaks, you know. So what I'm saying, you can't, if you don't know the meaning of the symbols that are called hieroglyphs or hieroglyphics or metanetric, then whatever, you can speak 100 language. If you don't know the meaning of it, don't mean anything.
Okay, let's take 2 years in particular. Let's take 332 BC and 323 BC. 332 BC meaning when Alexander came in and took over Egypt. 323 would be when the Ptolemy dynasty was established after the death of Alexander. At that time, there were still Egyptians in contact with Greeks that could give them
Or
symbols.
just the reverse. The Greeks were in contact with the
Well, yeah, you're right. Okay.
And then you had all those volumes of books
Okay.
that
Right.
were taken by Alexander into Greece.
That they gave credit to Aristotle, but we know better than that. But the point I'm trying to make is there was a contact between Europeans from Greece coming into Egypt in 332, making contact with some of the indigenous people that were still there. And at that point, Coptic didn't exist. At that point, they were still dealing with Dometic. Coptic is really a mixture of Greek and Egyptian,
Correct.
right? It's putting an Egyptian alphabet to a Greek language,
Okay. Correct.
right?
That's what I.
If I'm
Yeah, that's
not
what I got in my
mistaken.
book.
All right. Well, I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
talking
that's
about what I was
what I have in my
yes.
book. That,
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
you got to remember this, Mr. Nichols. Is
So the
that
contact was made for somebody to know the symbol. That's the point I'm trying to make.
this is okay.
Yeah.
You got to remember this: when the Greeks came into ancient Egypt, into the continent of Africa, we're talking about the time of Alexander the Greek, 332 BCE, all the way down to the supposed Roman era, etc., because the Romans and the Greeks are one and the same. But when they came in, when Alexander the Greek came into Egypt in 332 BCE, the Greeks did not have an alphabet.
I agree with
They
that.
had no writing system.
I
There's
agree.
never been an institution that ever came out of Greece during the time of antiquity. None. So they were a literate, savage, uncivilized European. Now, yes, they came in and they associated with our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians. They forced the Greek language on our ancient Egyptian ancestors. And by the way, our ancient Egyptian ancestors during the time of antiquity were the only literate people on planet Earth.
I agree. Nobody
Okay.
argue with nobody would argue
Okay?
with that.
So when the Greeks came in, they forced the Greek language on our ancient Egyptian ancestors by our ancestors being a literate people that created 3 forms of writing. The hieratic demotic, or let me reverse, the metanetric hieroglyphic, and the phonetic alphabet, which was the second one, and the hieratic demotic, because the hieratic demotic is only a cursive of the phonetic printed alphabet.
It's cursive. That's what
Okay,
it is.
so what I'm saying is that they forced the Greek language on our ancient Egyptian ancestors. our ancestors applied an alphabet to the Greek
Greek
spoken language.
Right.
Okay? So therefore, the Greeks never had an alphabet, but it was the Greek language that an alphabet was
applied. I
applied
agree.
to by our ancestors.
I agree with
and
that.
then it is misnomer today and said, oh, that's the Greek alphabet. The Greeks never had an alphabet. There's never been an alphabet that ever came out of Europe. Okay?
You're right, you're right.
Period. You see?
But
so
Westerners call this Greek alphabet Cyrillic.
this is okay.
But you're right, you're right.
Yes,
Mr. Berkeley.
this is okay. But let's establish that the people who invented and created a writing system was our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians. The only time that you can create an alphabet was during an alphabet was created was during the time of antiquity by our ancient Egyptian ancestors, and an alphabet could only be created one time. Once it's done, that's it. That's just like the chair. When the chair was invented and created, came through the culture of our ancient Egyptian ancestors, that's it. You have many different variations of chairs and et cetera, but a chair is a chair is a chair is a chair. You see? So what I'm saying is that the Greeks had no alphabet to write with. What they did, Mr. Nichols, is that they associated with our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, and no doubt they did ask him about the symbols, and no doubt they told
That
him.
was on the point I was making.
Okay, but the thing about it, here's the point I'm going to add to that. It was not what they learned from our ancient Egyptian ancestors was not contained. You know why? Because they had no schools to continue from generation to generation to generation. You see? So therefore, if I learn something from you, or an individual learns something from you, and he died, well then what was learned from Mr. Nichols, both of you all are dead, is not being carried on from generation to generation because you have nothing to continue it.
But herein lies the next contradiction. Let's look at the 32nd dynasty, which was the Ptolemy dynasty. That dynasty lasted for 285 years. That's continuity.
What kind of dynasty?
The Ptolemy, P-T-O,
Ptolemy.
Ptolemy.
Yeah.
Okay? That dynasty lasted for 285 years. And they had 13 generations. Okay? And in those 13 generations, they had a continuity.
Well, see, you can't, like I was going
You
back.
understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Well, see,
yes.
Mr. Nichols, you're using the chronology of ancient Egypt. You can't do that because it's based on biblical literature written by the Europeans. You see, you can't use a chronology. That's out. It's based on the Bible, created by the Europeans. So they can control our ancient Egyptian ancestors' culture and civilization in their today's institution.
Let's assume that you're right. And I don't want to argue you're being wrong because I found something in the light in history. But let's look at it this way. Let's use dialectics as a method. From 332 BC to 30 BC, the rise of the Roman and the ending of the empire, for that 302-year period, right? We're talking about a span of 302 years.
But
In
you're still using the chronology of ancient Egypt.
Well, what I'm saying is there's a recorded history that these people did rule in Egypt for that period of time.
Well, here, recorded where? On the chronology?
Right.
Can't use that, is what I'm saying. Because
Well then, as
Well,
far as
what
you're concerned,
about-
the Ptolemy, General Ptolemy didn't exist.
I didn't say that. I didn't say
Did
that.
Cleopatra exist?
You had, as white women, yes.
Yeah, but did she
No, no.
exist? We ain't talking about
You
whether
had,
white or
you
green.
have to see a lot of our African people in our African community think that Cleopatra was an African.
She was Greek.
That's Greek. You
I know
had,
that.
you had several or more.
Yeah.
Mitanni, Turkey.
Hmm?
Wasn't she born in Mitanni, Turkey?
No.
One of them was, they said.
See, the first Cleopatra was born as a daughter of
Ptolemy 12.
no, here. The first Cleopatra was born,
Oh, I'm talking the Greek Cleopatra, I'm sorry.
yeah, the first Cleopatra was born from Seleucus Nicator. That was his daughter. See, when Alexander died in 323, two of his army generals took over his supposed Eastern Empire.
It divided it.
Yeah, one was Ptolemy one, Lagi called Sotar. The word S-O-T-R means savior,
That's Seleucid.
and then Seleucid over in
Syria.
in Syria and Turkey and so forth and so on in that area. Yeah. So that was one of his daughters. One of his daughters was named Cleopatra, who married one of the Ptolemies, over Ptolemy 5 Epiphanies.
Keep peace in the empire.
Right, Ptolemy 5 Epiphanies married the first Cleopatra, or
Right, now-
Philometor.
What about the dating, when they say thermoluminescence as a dating process, or the radiocarbon dating for the arts and artifacts and objects that were created or fired, pottery, figurines in the temples and tombs, as far as the dates?
Well, carbon dating 14 you can't use.
You can't use
You
it?
can't use
Diop
it.
used it all along.
He was wrong.
Huh?
He was wrong. Can't
Diop
use it.
he banked his life on carbon 14.
I'm sorry for him. But anyway, no, you can't use that. The University of
Yeah,
Chicago.
but what evidence do you have to present
Well,
that that can be
I'm
used?
going to tell you.
I would like to know, really.
Yeah, that's what I do
Huh?
too.
I'm going to tell you.
Because that's what,
Okay.
the things, charts that I have and stuff, the
I
objects are
mean,
based
what you're doing is turning all history
on
upside
these
down.
things.
Right.
So that's
And I agree, it needs to be turned upside down.
right,
But
that's
I
what
don't know exactly what
understand.
you use it to do it.
Okay, I'm going to send you. I'm going
Okay.
to send either I'm going to send it to Clemson Brown so he can give it to you, or you give me your addresses and I'll mail
No, I'll
you.
get it if he got it.
Yeah, okay, and I'll mail you. I'll
How do you
say
see
it
carbon
in a
14?
publication. But anyway, University of
Well,
Chicago
let's see what he's gonna
14
say.
carbon dating is the European scholar community don't use that anymore. This is the reason why. Say for instance you get an artifact, for instance, or anything, and you say, okay, you're supposed to be an expert in the field of the artifact that is being presented to you for dating. Okay. Now the first thing you're going to do is use a guesstimation. It's the first thing you're going to do. You say, well, okay, now this looked to me like it came during the time of whatever dates, and it should be according to that time. It should be up to the present time. It should be so many years old, whatever the case might be. Now, but they say, okay, let's go to carbon dating 14. Now, carbon dating 14, once it is applied to an object, gives you 6 or 7 or 8 supposed different dates. Suppose now. Then that individual will pick the closest date to his theory on the object. Now, the reason why they don't use that's number one. Number two, the reason why they can discontinue.
When did they
using
stop using it?
I'm telling you now, huh? Here recently.
And then
It has to
they
be. The
replace
reason-
it with thermoluminescence.
Okay, wait now,
Okay.
just a moment.
The reason it
Just
has
a
to be
moment.
reason is the Ligas and the Johansons use carbon for dealing with Ramapithecus, for dealing with Australopithecus afarensis, in dealing with Homo habilis, in dealing with sapien, in dealing with Neanderthalensis,
Well, see,
right?
well, see, that's all. See, those are European names.
Well, we live in a
Constructed
European
just-
dominated
well,
society.
And the objects, see, that's
Well,
what I'm going about, the
here's what we have.
3,500 BC
And
objects.
you're right, I won't argue that you're
You
not
know,
right.
these
I just
things,
want to
that's
see
why
the
I'm
source.
listening.
See, these are all European names. They
Yeah.
sound good, okay?
No, it's the way they age them and give you their dating and their entry into the universe.
Well, hold it.
Into the time, what we call the time sheet spatio.
Okay, let me tell you about carbon dating 14.
Right.
They took an animal and they carbon dated that animal. The carbon datation of that animal is supposed to have read to be that animal is supposed to have been 40,000 years old. Or let's say 400,000 years old, I'm sorry, 400,000 years old. Okay? Then they carbon dated the food inside of the animal's body. The food that they carbon dated said was 6,000 years old. So you got, now how can you have an animal, you understand? You have an animal
1,000 years old. and
400,000 years old or 40,000 years old, and then the food in the animal's stomach is 6,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, something very, very old.
See, something is wrong. See, so
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
send, hold your thought, I'm going to dig up this publication, and I'm going to Xerox copies of the whole chapter of why the Europeans do not use carbon dating 14.
Well, Time magazine came out about 3 months ago,
Okay.
and they gave us an evolutionary chronology from Aristoteles all the way to sapien, and we went through 16 different evolutionary stages on the human chain, okay? And each one of them was carbon dated. And that was 2 months ago.
But this is okay. What I'm saying to you is that this is what the Europeans have created to control their school system, the junk that they put in the lies that they put into their school system. Okay, they have to do that in order, because they got men out there and women out there with degrees in these lies. You see, so they have to.
It's the whole school of development.
Yeah, right.
Perpetuates the system.
Wonder why check1
DNA is one
pick
of
it
the
up
latest
though
things
with
they
his
do.
laboratory.
You agree?
Right.
I looked at the DNA thing. I don't know anything about DNA, but in the Simpson trial, I looked at this. But I saw when Barry Sheck especially posed certain questions to the woman that headed the laboratory in Maryland, she got confused because she walked away from it. For example, she used terms of billions to millions. So now we know there aren't billions and billions of people on this earth. Is that not correct? This is the first problem she had with Sheck. I forgot her name now. She went off to a wedding and never returned, by the way. And then when he said to her,
Oh, you mean in the OJ case?
in the OJ case,
Okay,
this
okay.
is a new science they have now. Isn't that a dating process to a degree? Allegedly found in the blood structure, right? First we were told that there were types of blood, right? Then all of a sudden they came up with an idea that they can tell your blood from anybody else's blood in the world according to their DNA system. One man in the trial said this: it should never be used except in the laboratory in terms of human health and whatever. It should never been brought out when it's outside the human body. That's how the term, you heard contamination constantly being brought, contamination. I have said to this brother here, whom I've known for years, one of the biggest problems confronting us, if we are to write our version of history, that's what we have to do, is that Bible. It has brought more confusion in our ranks than any book ever been published.
I agree with that.
Do you know what I do with the Bible? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, he gave me a pretty good idea.
Well, with the
Hey,
DNA
wait a
too,
minute.
we know what's interesting about the DNA
Yeah.
is that they talk about the 2 strands within
Yeah.
it, but black people have more than 2 strands. And then there are extra things on there that they have been using the term junk DNA. And
Remember
kind
when
of
Sheck
throwing,
asked
how
this
could you
woman-
throw away
Yeah, but
something
wait,
and call it
Sheck
junk?
asked this woman,
So that,
when she did a sample, she said, where did they come from? She said to him, it came from Detroit's Red Cross. She said, was there any black people in it? She said, no. And I don't know if you paid as much attention to the trial. I was retired. I taped a great deal of it. Cochran said he didn't pretend to be a scientist. I'm certainly not one. I'm not a physical scientist. I'm not any kind of scientist, but I do try to think. What I feel the problem has been, and what I liked about your tape when you said everything virtually we've been taught has been written by Europeans in recent times, not in 1,000 years ago.
Well, nobody would disagree with that.
But wait, this is what we have been taught. If we are to find a more objective history for our future, we're going to have to climb off that wagon.
Correct.
We got to get off that wagon.
Absolutely.
We have
Absolutely.
to.
Absolutely.
Brother Walter Williams, would you go through for us, and then, so how was that history created? How did the Europeans create history as a discipline? Walk us through that, and then we'll.
Okay, well, you have to go back into Europe. We're talking about 15th, 16th century, which is just recent.
Recently, last 500
Very
years.
recent.
Right, right. Okay. You'll find that the Europeans, the masses of Europeans living throughout Europe could not read or write. They were illiterate.
True.
And no
That was up to 200 years ago.
Right. A lot of them still are. But
Gutenberg Press.
Yeah.
so they had.
Gutenberg Press only allowed the ruling class to read.
That absolutely.
See, so they had no school system for the masses of Europeans. Now, in 1437, Johannes Gutenberg created a printing press with movable print for the Europeans. Okay, and he fell on financial hardship, and he borrowed money from a fellow German by the name of Johannes Fuss, F-U-S-T, who was a goldsmith, and at a high interest.
Sound like a Jew, doesn't it?
High, very high.
Very high.
Very high.
Do it.
Capitalism is on the move now. See, that's economics to history.
Yeah,
See, now you're putting economics to history.
okay, at a very high interest. He couldn't pay it back,
Yeah.
and they confiscated this
That's true.
printing press. Okay,
Time just put that out last week.
confiscated. Okay. Now, in the meantime, the Roman Catholic Church
Hey, there you
You got it.
was
There you go.
was up and running to a certain degree in Europe, because they had just prior to the time of the first printed Bible, which was printed from that Gutenberg press in 1475. Prior to that, the Roman Catholic Church was being created over in what we know today as the Vatican, on the outskirts of Rome, over the catacombs.
Vatican City.
Right. They were building the Vatican City, and the first thing that they built was St. Peter's Church, over the supposed catacomb of Peter. Okay? But that goes into another history. Now, the Roman Catholic Church, and it goes back to these Lombards, these money lenders and the Templars and so forth and so on, they were in a polemic with the people who controlled the monetary system. Okay?
When you said polemic, what was the polemic?
An argument.
Argument.
Okay, over this, they didn't like each other because
The class struggle.
right, you know,
Conflicts within
What was
those.
the conflict? I just want to know.
conflict was over money. In other words, here,
Money or barter.
like I told you before, Clemson, is this: the Lombards had changed the money system from precious metal, which is gold and silver, to
Paper.
paper.
Okay.
You see? So they were in control. Whoever controlled this
Mercantile capital.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
they were in control. See, so that was a polemic there. So what happened was that these Jews, using the printing press of Johannes Gutenberg that they had confiscated, printed for the very first time in 1475 a Bible known as the Pentateuch, or the Old Testament, or the first 5 books of Moses. Now that Bible was not printed for no Jews now. It was printed for Christians. See, because the Jews had their Torah, and later their Talmud. You see? Now,
But let me stop you on one thing. The Pentateuch and the Torah is exactly the same thing. One is Greek, one is Hebrew.
well, what I'm saying is this.
They're the same thing though.
The Pentateuch
Yeah.
is a derivative of the
Penta is
Torah.
5 in Greek.
I'm-
Tuch book.
I understand, but what I'm saying, we're saying the same thing. The Pentateuch is a derivative of the original Torah.
It's just one in Greek and one in Hebrew. It's the same thing.
No, there's no such thing as Hebrew.
It's a Phoenician then.
Like, no such thing as a Phoenician, because when you look up Phoenician, it leads you back to the Canaanites and the Israelites, and the Canaanites and the Israelites can only be found, and Phoenician can only be found in biblical literature.
Syriac.
Syriac, what do you call in Syriac?
Syriac
That's-
is Aramaic when it's written.
That comes from Aramaic, comes from
Aramaic
Aram.
is spoken, Syriac is written.
Okay,
One is the literature.
Aramaic comes from one Aram, okay, which was one of the sons of Shem in the family table of nations in the Bible. You can't use that.
But Aramaic was, listen, wait a minute, you can use it. I tell you what, Aramaic was the lingua franca of that whole area for almost 1,500 years.
Sir. No, sir, you can't.
From the rise of Persia in
No,
538.
never been a Persia. But anyway, let's go
Never
back.
been a Persia?
No, sir.
It's still a Persia.
No,
What is Iran?
that's what they're saying. See, anything that you find in the Bible cannot be used as value.
Iran and Persia is the same thing, Farsi.
Supposed to be, but what I'm
Well, what
saying,
is Farsi? F-A-R-S-I.
I have no idea.
Farsi is the language of the Iranians. They went from Iran to Aryan to Persia.
Where did they come from? That's the key.
North India.
No, they came out of southern Russia.
No, not the Farsis.
Here's what I'm saying.
Indo-European, Farsi, first stop Persia.
No, the Persia can only be found in biblical literature. Anything that you can find in the Bible, you take it to the nearest garbage can and throw it in. Historically worthless. Okay?
In other words, if you went to the Britannica Encyclopedia and looked up Persia, and they gave you the whole history of Persia, and they gave you the first early name of Persia. The earliest name of Persia was Elam, E-L-A-M. That's the earliest
biblical.
name.
Go back to the Bible.
Back to the
That's
Bible again.
yeah, what I'm saying. This is what the Britannica will give you, the earliest
They're
name.
supposed to give you, right, what do you expect for them to give you? They're going to give you that, run you right back to the Bible.
Then do we reject everything?
Yeah.
Don't mess up their whole history.
Yeah, because see, the Europeans, when they created a school system, they used the Bible
No, I'm
to create,
against- yeah.
to create world history from. That's what they was teaching from. Okay? So they're gonna, even today, they're gonna run you back to the Bible from one name to the other in the
So
Bible.
all those names in the Bible, the Elams and the Shem, Ham, Japheth, Noah, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Hivites, all of that's wrong.
But where the
Historically
symbols?
incorrect.
Historically
Where did these
incorrect.
societies leave?
Never-
I'm sorry.
The
Never existed.
Aramaic
Leave.
doesn't
Right.
exist, all of that.
Didn't
Hisop.
exist.
No, but what did they leave
Hisop,
us in terms? He started
Hivites.
talking about symbols, which was not interpreted.
Okay.
What did these allegedly biblical names leave us to prove that these areas
There's no
existed?
proof
Where?
there.
Where's the symbols?
How can you?
Where's the creation?
Right, and don't allow the Europeans to take Northeast Africa, which is part of the African continent belonging to our people, and make it the land of the Bible and put all this junk over there. Okay, so don't do that. Let's not be naive. Now, let me get back to the creation of the school system and the subject that was created, please, called history. Okay? Now, when the Jews printed for the very first time a Bible called the Pentateuch, or the Old Testament, or the first 5 books of Moses, which is all one and the same. All is a derivative of the Torah, the original Torah, and the original Torah is Sefer HaYasa literature written by Rashi, but that goes into another subject. But anyway, this European, having a printing press, could print up thousands of books or thousands of pieces of literature, but it wouldn't do him no good, Dr. Jeffries. You know why? He had nobody in Europe to read it.
Couldn't read. That's right.
Couldn't read it. So what he did, he went into the Roman Catholic Church
Church was the key.
and got Martin Luther out of that church and put money behind Martin Luther to nail 95 reform theses on the church castle door in Wittenberg, Germany, for the Roman Catholic Church to reform. Now, how can a Roman Catholic priest, poor man, go up against a well-organized institution as the Roman Catholic Church? Can't do it. Okay,
But he did do it.
This is with the
And he
help.
won.
This is the help of the Jews, the Jewish finance. That's what I'm
I
saying.
won't argue with that.
Okay, that's 15,
Now you're putting
17.
economics and history again.
This is okay.
You're getting good.
Okay, thank you. So this is
But you're right.
15. Thank you. This is 15, 17. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the next thing that the Jews did was to create a school system.
This guy behind you will fall in love with you.
Okay.
So when you say the Jews, you don't mean,
Man,
you
look
mean
funny.
the European
It won't.
Jews, not the
It won't. It won't. It won't.
Beni
Speaking
Israel.
No.
It won't.
You're not talking about that. You're talking about the
This guy-
Ashkenazi.
I'm talking about
This guy will fall in love with you.
the original Jews. I'm not talking about no Philosopher Jews.
Yeah.
That's another subject.
I'm sorry, Beni Israel.
Yeah,
Beni Israel.
that's another subject. They didn't come about
You're
in the
talking about
19th
the
century.
But you're
Ashkenazi.
talking about the Ashkenazi.
Yeah.
Well, Sephardic and Ashkenazi and so forth and so forth. But what I'm saying to you is that the Philosophers was created in the 19th century, but we'll get into that. I'm serious. All right, now, what they did,
I'll tell Dr. Ben on you.
And that's Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett, he did my part.
We can tell Dr. Ben on you.
I had a session with Dr. Ben in 1998.
Oh my
In
goodness.
St. Louis, we were on the phone
And you still alive?
Oh yeah, Dr. Ben, he was,
Robert, you better go and get Dr. Ben.
Dr. Ben, he's my man. I like Dr. Ben.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Dr. Ben's a philosopher.
okay, this is okay. But you had to know the history of the philosophy. We'll get into that.
But let me explain this to you. Now, the Jews, getting behind Martin Luther, created a school system, a Protestant Christian school for the secular community, beginning in Germany. That's where it began. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church countered that with parochial schools for the secular community. Okay? To counter that. Then, any kind of school system, you have to have a curriculum to teach from. And that's where they invented the subject and the discipline that we call history. Okay? And that was the beginning of the second European Renaissance era. Over there.
The Reformation.
Reformation, and that began the
Second Renaissance.
The second Renaissance of Europe, which was a literary Renaissance. And whoever likes history.
But remember, the Jew had the money now.
Now, of course,
that's
he
the
had the money.
economics now.
Okay, I
Don't
understand.
ever leave that out.
I'm not.
And
I'm
this
not.
guy behind you,
No, we have to
okay,
get to how did you got the money? The system again. But anyway,
He
let me go
created a
ahead.
system. But see, so you have now a system in place
Yeah.
whereby a school system began, and this curriculum that they put into the system was made up of the subject that we call history, and they used the Bible as its base foundation to teach from. Okay? Then in 1527, a man by the name of Jacob van Liesveld, a Swedish theologian, put the Old Testament and the New Testament on the one cover.
Called it the Geneva.
Well, no, not the, that was Miles Coverdale made it.
No, Geneva was.
No, he created the Geneva. Miles Coverdale did. Okay, but let me see. In the meantime, when the Jews came out with the Old Testament written for the Christians, the Roman Catholic Church, Pope Alexander VI, commissioned a homosexual by the name of Desiderius Erasmus to write something on the object of Christianity. The object of Christianity is this Jesus the Christ. It took him 16 years. In 1516, he came out with the Novum Instrumentum. 1519, they changed it to the Novum Testamentum. 1535, they changed it to the New Testament. But he came out with 3 Gospels known as the Synoptic Gospel, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Because they always tell you that John came later.
The fourth gospel.
Okay, the fourth gospel. Okay, that came out in the King James Version. The fourth gospel came out in 1611, the King James Version, created by Lancelot Andrewes and his group of theologians. And that's where you'll find in the fourth gospel Jesus the Christ being a Jew. But Erasmus was a playwright of his day in Europe. He was an ex-Roman Catholic priest. Okay? And
most of the things where they came to church, you could read, right?
Right. That's where he was trained to read and write. And he was a noted playwright of Europe. Okay? He wrote Adages, Insuridion. That was his plays that he wrote. Okay? And they commissioned him to write something on the object of Christianity. And he came out with the Synoptic Gospels in 1516. And then he added 6 other manuscripts to that, 1 and 2 Peter, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatian, and the Epistle to the Romans. Those were his writing. Okay, and he died in 1535, you see. So that gives you a little overview of how history as a subject, created by the Europeans. And like Brother Dargan said about I'm trying to, I lost my thought.
And relative to what? You mean about the Bible itself, or what?
No, it was something I was going to bring up. But anyway.
Well, let me ask you this.
Not to get it back.
But if he's saying that the Old Testament existed, that the Jews had their version of the Old Testament, and that existed before, but still, where did that come about? I mean, was that taken from scrolls and things that dated themselves back into antiquity? If the Jews already had the Pentateuch, not the Pentateuch, but the Torah and so forth, how old is the Torah? How did it evolve?
Okay.
I mean, we're saying that they wrote history around the Old Testament, but that Old Testament was taken from an earlier manuscript. When did that come in?
But
Okay,
I wrote a short history of the English Bible and I gave it to you. Do you have a copy of it here?
Yeah, I have a copy.
Or why don't you give him a copy to study?
Okay,
All right.
here, let me explain your question. Remember, the Old Testament came out of the religion called Judaism. That's what you have to understand.
The Old Testament.
Yes, sir.
Judaism didn't exist when the Old Testament came into being.
Okay.
The Old Testament basically came out of the Book of the Dead, if you want to know the truth.
No. The Book of the Dead, no.
Utilized
No,
certain. They didn't come out of it.
No,
They utilized certain stuff
No,
from
the Book of the
Dead.
Dead is nothing but a derivative of Adolf Ehrman's grammatical dictionary of the hieroglyphs that he created. He was a German scholar. He was a curator of Egyptian artifacts at the Berlin Museum in 1880. That's in my book too.
Let me ask you this: was Moses to you? Did he exist, or he just
Never
incarnated?
existed.
Okay.
I never booked it.
Never,
See, that's what
never
makes it
existed.
hard to argue with you. Everything we say, you said all this.
Hey, particularly the Metanetia. Particularly the Metanetia.
Yeah.
You know what I say to that?
Yeah, particularly the Metanetia. That's the whole thing that knocked me out.
Listen,
Is the Metanetia.
But you
I
know-
get ready to jump on him. He said, didn't exist. I got the Bible.
Because if he said the Bible, no, and all of this, that, and the other, but he gets to the Metanetia. The Metanetia is not Moses.
Yeah.
I got to go back to
Moses'
the
form.
Right.
But I had questions
And
about
so
it.
he-
Kid
Yeah.
in
That-
Sunday school.
Yeah.
I don't know who wrote this book.
Okay, but
But you know that's your man now. You got your man.
But okay, but
You got
let
your
me
man.
tell you this. This is beautiful.
Go ahead, Walter.
Okay, let me tell you this. You see, always remember that Judaism as a religion is the last of the three major religions to come into existence, even though they teach you just in
It's
reverse.
the opposite.
I agree.
Right, just in reverse.
They say the
All right?
opposite.
One, you cannot put Judaism in BC time.
Oh.
Don't do that. That's where you make a mistake. It's not a BC religion. Number two, you cannot put Judaism to predate one Solomon Bar Isaac called Rashi, who created the formula for Judaism. Okay? Number three, you cannot predate Judaism before the first Crusades in 1096. You can't do it. Okay? Rashi, living in Trees, France. His family were barons. Okay? And he created what is known as Judaism between 1180 and 1200. Okay? Created a formula for it. His formula.
That was Maimonides, wasn't it?
Huh?
That is Maimonides at that period.
Who?
Maimonides.
Oh, Maimonides?
Yeah.
No, he came roughly about 100 years after Rashi. See, Rashi was born in 1040.
Okay.
Okay. And Maimonides began his Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of Moses, in 1180.
Right in the 11th century, right?
Well,
1180,
12th century.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, 12th
But
century.
before that,
Okay.
you're telling me that the first 5 books of Moses did not exist?
I'm gonna tell you how
He
it
said
came
Moses
about.
didn't exist, so that throw your whole
Yeah.
argument off.
I'm gonna tell you how the Pentateuch literature came about.
Okay.
Okay.
Please continue.
The Old Testament, like I said before, came out of the religion called Judaism. That's the first thing you have to understand. Okay? Now, I gave you the dates for the very first time of the creation of the religion called Judaism.
That was 10 something.
1080 to 1100, 20 years it took to formulate this lie known as Judaism as a religion or a beginning religion. Okay? That's the first seed of it. Created by Solomon Bar Isaac called Rashi. Okay? In Trees, France. He was a baron. Okay? His family were vineyard grape growers. And he created what is known as Sefer HaYasa literature. Sefer means book. Ha
Sefer
means,
Torah.
no.
They have a thing, the Jews have a thing called
yeah, okay.
Sefer Torah.
Right, okay, Sefer Torah. But now they
And
do.
Mishnah.
Now they see this has all been added,
Right.
Mr. Nichols.
No, you're right what you said. I'm
Yeah,
not arguing
I
that.
understand, but
I'm not
saying,
arguing that. I'm just talking
Yeah.
about defining terms.
Yeah, you're right too. But this is what you were saying was added later.
Right.
Okay, but I'm talking about the raw origin foundation coming out of Sefer Yasa literature. Sefer means books, Ha means of, and Yasa means books of the upright ones. Who's the upright ones? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the upright ones. Okay? Now, Rashi created this Torah, Sefer, Yasa literature. Okay? And by him creating the first Torah, he became the world's first rabbi. Also, you see? And then his grandson, Jacob ben Meir, who was a Baal Tosafot writer. The word Tosafot means a writer of appendix. He began to write appendix, and they credited him as writing the Babylonian Talmud, but that's questionable. Then you come up to the third person. I'm just kind of give an overview. Moses Maimon, called Maimonides, in 1180.
Had a hospital named once after him in New York City.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yes. They closed it down. It used to be a city hospital in New York.
Oh, okay, I didn't know
Used to be in
that.
the Bronx,
I
yeah.
didn't know that.
I want you to remember one thing, though. You and I have to be careful. We're going to have to watch it.
Okay.
You and I want you to know that. The biggest one in the world is New York.
But the word Judah, that came from the Judahites, right?
No-
They
no
said
such thing.
Judahites.
No
And
such
so
thing.
before them was the Hebrews.
No, there's no such thing as a Hebrew.
And so no such thing as the Hebrews, okay?
See, it's hard to really communicate with you.
Okay, okay.
It's every reference that we have based on what we know,
But what
you
you
say
read,
don't exist.
been told.
Correct.
Right,
So,
okay.
so you
For
said
example,
like,
let me give you an illustration of what I'm talking about. Let's assume that I said Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible.
No Moses.
Okay, you said there's no Moses. I ain't got no argument.
okay.
Okay? Now, but by the same token,
Then he says Jews, and
yeah,
then there's no Jews.
yeah,
And then you say Hebrews, because Hebrews predated the word Jew.
Right.
And he said no Hebrews.
right. So now listen.
Okay, wait, we're gonna continue
He wants
our
to bring-
conversation. I'm gonna bring something
But
into
Jews
play.
are getting a retreat
Okay.
from their slavery here. Oftentimes when I talk to very dear friends and what have you, and not that I have all the answers or maybe 1/4 of them, but I realize what we're looking at is very false and we'll never liberate ourselves if we keep accepting this as truth, especially about history or any other thing that we're dealing with here. To me, the Bible has become the most damaging book of all the books to have ever been written and published. The Bible has become the most damaging one because you're trying to look at history through the eyes of these alleged books in the Bible. Here lies the problem. But being under
But if you're going
attack-
to teach people and convert people, unless you address the Bible, you are,
Gonna lose them.
No,
That's
we
right.
can address, wait a minute, we must address it, but not as a truth. Listen, what do you think of Massey? The Englishman Massey.
Gerald Massey.
Gerald
Gerald
Massey.
Massey?
What do you think of his works?
well,
He divided the
I
world.
have been, quoting him.
And his lecture series on that Bible.
Dr. Jeffries,
Huh?
you've been quoting.
Gerald Massey. I said, yeah, that's what I know I was going to get out.
No
Please.
problem.
Okay, now,
Hold on a minute, let me set up.
okay, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, you can say that. I want you to pass this out. For each and every one of you. Ladies are first, of course. This came from Chicago Sun-Times. Read the second one.
I
What
want
does
to
it
read it
say?
out loud so we can get it on the camera.
Though scholars continue to search, nothing in the Egyptian records show evidence of Moses, the biblical plagues of the Exodus, says Bob Curson, Kurson. And this information comes from the Egyptian Gallery of the Oriental Institute Museum, closed since 1996 in Chicago.
And read the date when this was, in the newspaper came out.
May 23rd, Sunday, 1999.
And could you read, other words, there's no Moses, they're saying, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. and read about slavery up there.
Slavery did not build the pyramids.
Well, everybody knew that.
Slaves did not build the pyramids.
Everybody
knows.
Slavery, in
Jews are
fact,
just
was not an
black
important part of
Well, even
ancient
McCoy, hold on,
Wait,
let's take a different
you're
path
drowning out.
argument.
Hold on, let her
Let's
read.
take a different path to argument.
Wait, hold it. Let her finish reading that, then we can deal with it. Go ahead, Dr. Jeffrey. Read about the slavery in Egypt.
Slaves did not build the pyramids. Slavery, in fact, was not an important part of ancient Egyptian society.
Thank you. Okay? Now,
Yes, that-
No
that
historian
we
would
know.
argue with
Huh?
that. No
We
historian
have
would
no
argue with that.
arguments with.
okay.
You'd be surprised. They're
There's no
living.
knowledgeable historian
Telling
would
you,
argue with that.
that's the reason why I was telling when Dr. Jeffries and this
But,
panel here.
let's get back
Right
to
now,
this.
let me make this point. I was telling Dr. Jeffries and this panel that we cannot put slavery into our ancient Egyptian ancestors' society and time in world history. That's all I was saying.
Wait,
But go ahead.
let me try it from this way. The whole Jewish concept of Jews, slaves, building pyramids is all bullshit. Let's throw all that out.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay?
that.
Now, let's look at the unification of Egypt. Egypt was the world's first national state, meaning that the nomarchs along 4,000 banks of the Nile was able to unify upper and lower with the two crowns. Unification don't come because I want it, it becomes because it's forced.
No,
But Moses was one of the
forced.
greatest generals the world. We call him Tutmosis.
No, that's going back to chronology of ancient Egypt. Did the ancient Egyptians say that was Tutmosis? In 1922, Howard Carter found a tomb that we know today as King Tut. He went in there, he found nothing in that tomb that says Tutankhamun. Nothing was written in there that said no Tutankhamun. He came out and faced the cameras and said, "We have just found the tomb of King Tutankhamun."
But what about the hieroglyphs?
His name, his hieroglyphic name was not on
On his cartouche.
cartouche.
How do you know?
They
that-
decide the
how do
cartouche.
you can't, going back
And
again.
on the cartouche deciphered, he had all 5 names.
Hold it,
Right?
hold it. Are you going to believe what I'm saying?
No, I'm
No, we're
listening.
laughing.
I'm
Are
listening.
you going to believe what white
No,
folks
no,
say?
no,
I'm
no,
saying
I'm listening
white
with an
folks
open
have
mind.
pulled the wool over us about deciphering the hieroglyphics. And I'd like for Dr. Jeffries to read in my book, The Historical Origin of Christianity, an appendix that I wrote about why the Meta-Netia hieroglyphics has never been deciphered. Okay? And let me take time.
But see, what you said, throw all scholars back to the drawing
I'm
board.
sorry.
I believe,
That's what
wait a
you
minute,
do.
wait a minute. I believe this.
I'm sorry.
I believe we've been lied to in the last 500 years more than any people on earth.
Okay.
I believe we got to rediscover our history, redefine it, reconstruct it.
Okay.
Some of us have tried that.
Okay.
But even in doing that, you have to have some yardstick of reference to measure things by.
Everything I have told you.
You know what I'm saying? You need some
everything
yardstick of reference.
Mr. Nichols, everything I have told you that didn't exist, I put something in this place. I'm just going to go out and say, well, this didn't happen. I have something to put in this place.
Okay, Moses
so-
didn't exist, right?
No, sir. The white folks said it too.
Okay,
No,
well,
they didn't.
let's assume you're right. And I'm inclined to believe
Okay,
you're all right.
all right.
Okay, if Moses didn't exist and they attribute the first 5 books to who did write the first 5 books?
I haven't told you. Solomon Bar Isaac called Rashi, who created the religion called Judaism, because the first 5 books came out of that religion.
But you're talking about 1180 AD, right?
That's the last of the 3 major Western religions to come into existence, to be created.
Uh-huh.
They have told you a lie that Jesus was a Jew. There's never been a Jesus to be a Jew, okay? And that by him being a Jew, then there had to be Judaism was first. That's how they rationalize it. And the people who are out there.
Well, let's
in
say
the-
he was a Jew before he was a Christian. Jesus was never a Christian. People attribute became
I
Christian.
understand,
later.
but it's never been a
But he was
Jesus.
born a Jew,
It's never
you know.
been a Jesus. My book tells you that. Here, Dr. Jeffries, I want you to read.
What about Israelites and Hebrews?
That's all biblical. There's never been no Israelites or Hebrews. Hebrews is only in the pages of biblical literature by way of an Abraham.
Well, listen, and tell Elmira, right?
Telemana letters,
Okay, when they deciphered to write on the wall,
it can't.
well, you keep saying, well, this
The
is correct.
Telemana, what script was it written in?
It was at that time in Hieratic.
I have.
At that time, we're talking 1435 BC.
Okay,
At that time, the Egyptian was Hieratic.
that's what the European. Okay, go ahead.
That's what the Europeans say. Okay.
Right.
Now let's say the Europeans are lying. I don't think
Okay.
he is.
All
I
right.
do. I believe he is.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
But for the sake of argument, what we're saying is they use the word Hebrew. Hebrew was these people who had followed the Blue Nile. Wait a minute, let's see who the Hebrew was. The people who had followed the Blue Nile the way it met the White Nile, bringing these sheep and goats and selling them in the cities that was growing up on the banks of the
There's
Nile.
never been no Hebrew.
That was nomadic shepherds. That's what the word means.
Then you're going back to Hyksos in the chronology of ancient.
No, Hyksos simply means foreigner in Egyptian.
Also, shepherd kings also.
No, shepherd king is some Jews attached to it
I'm
later.
telling you what the Hyksos, what they're saying the Hyksos means shepherd kings.
Actually, when you get into the history, and I did this on my own research, the Hyksos were really desert Phoenicians. That's who they were.
Phoenicians is biblical. There's never been no people, I keep telling you, Mr. Nichols. Now, was there a Hebrew language?
The Hebrew language is Phoenician.
No, it's no Phoenicians to be a Hebrew. Okay? See, the Hebrew
Well, let me tell you
language.
what my research showed me, based on what I was able to put together.
Okay.
When the people that you call Jews really wasn't Jews at the time. In the early period, they were called Hebrews. Jews didn't come
What
into
language did they speak?
geese.
That's you're going back to Ethiopia now.
Well, that's where they came from.
No such thing. You talking about the Philosophians?
No, we talking about the early Hebrews.
No Hebrews. It's only biblical. Can't you get that?
Hebrew
Mr.
is an Egyptian word.
No, how you know this Egyptian word? You ever heard the spoken language of the ancient
You
Egypt?
don't have to. I never heard a whole lot of language that I know
All right,
exists.
so what language did, what language did this Hebrew come out of?
Hebrew, wait a minute, let's define what Hebrew is.
Okay.
Now, this is what I was able to put together, and I'm spending a lot of time. I'm not saying this at the top of my head, so take
Okay.
it seriously.
All right.
When the people who had fought with Joshua to come in to take the land, wait a minute,
It's the Bible again.
wait a minute,
It's the
wait a
Bible
minute.
again. Please don't take me back to the Bible. Take the Bible to the nearest garbage can and throw it out because it's garbage. Has no relevance to the true history of the world. Nothing. It's
Carl,
fictional stories.
Can you do that same foundation without using the Bible? Can you make that same
I would have to go and
foundation?
reconstruct
Or
it. It takes time.
establish- or
Because there's too much has been left. I say every argument you begin, or every dialogue you begin to establish, he said don't exist.
Yeah, the only thing I'm
I'm
saying
gonna tell you the
is,
truth.
can you establish that without using the Bible as the reference?
I would have to think, but because you're talking about time, space, and force. You're talking about a long time ago, many years ago, many events have happened since.
No, but there must be other.
It could be done. It could be done. And I don't call myself no pro-religious person. I'm not pro-religion at
I
all.
understand.
So don't get me hung up on
And
that.
the thing that I'm beginning to see is
Oh,
that
yeah.
if it can be done, how can it be done if you're not using history that came out of the Bible as the basis? There is no other written, and if you go to their archaeological digs and finds, what can you establish that perhaps they haven't manipulated a structure? We are really in a quagmire here.
Yeah, we are. We've been telling you that for years.
We discussed
have to
it.
do
You're going to have to take the
Wait a minute.
Bible and throw it in the nearest garbage can you can find. You're going to have to take this Jesus Christ and this dead white man on the cross and throw it into the nearest garbage can that you find. You're going to have to take Islam al-Laikam and the Laikam Salam and the Prophet Muhammad and throw it in the nearest garbage can along with the Quran as fast as you can. And you're going to have to take this God and take that God and throw him in the garbage can. Because it is historically worthless. It is holding us down as a people.
I'd agree.
Okay? Now,
That's
I
a
want...
big hole back.
Right.
But I am
Agreed.
interested in the analysis, and that is why I specialize in ancient Egypt and West Africa, Central Africa, all over the continent, because hoping that within cave art, concepts and ideas, there are Pan-African thoughts that go into Kemet, from the cave art and then into West Africa itself, so that while you have positions that talk about a covenant relationship, look at the parallels between Egypt and West Africa. Now, this may be a long time, right, geographically, a long way off,
No, but
there are
it's
some
natural.
concepts,
It's natural.
and by time I make gobs comparisons of someone sitting on the world, right, and the full philosophical analysis of what we're looking at, and covenant relationship, knowing that the Bible too have similar kinds of statements, right?
That's what you have.
Because the culture of the Bible is African. And
The
so if
culture
I
of the
look at
Bible
the
is a lie.
3000 BC,
It is a lie,
and I
Dr.
start to see that in ancient Kemet, you see the same hairstyle, look back in Benin, 14th to 18th century, same hairstyle, go over and over and over again,
Yeah, but
of
the Bible has
objects
no
and things in the
photographs, no
culture.
pictures.
I still say that the culture of the Bible is the culture that comes out of these parts of the world.
Take the Bible and set it aside. Now, you're talking about two African people. These are all Africans you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Living in the same continent.
And so that there is
Okay,
a
but just a
continuity
What do you think
in
about- wait,
visual,
wait,
in visual
now.
language.
This is okay.
What do you think the Bible
I'm
was
not
written about?
I'm not trying to downplay that or say that's wrong. Main thing is that you're talking about two different cultures. These are two different cultures.
Yes, two different
But-
cultures, but there's
No,
some
this one grew
similarities.
from this one. That's what
Okay,
she said.
because they are all
This one here
African.
is a continuation.
You have similar. I live in Chicago. You live in New York. We are both Africans. We're going to have similarities.
And that's what I'm interested in
There's
saying.
nothing wrong with that. No one's denying that.
But I
I'm
still
saying-
say that some of that same similarity is in the biblical culture.
Take the Bible. You can't do that. You got to know the historical origin of the Bible. What is the historical origin of the Bible? Who wrote the Bible?
It's had the same culture of this.
No.
The culture, this culture, these two cultures are not writing no Bibles. The European who created the
Well,
Bible.
they might
No,
have
you wrong.
the European
created
might
that?
have written it.
No.
Who created the,
Culture,
who created the Bible?
For all of the things, Jack, but the Bible is an African document.
Where?
And it was carried to Europe.
It's alphabet. In what alphabet?
The first 5 languages of the Bible were all, wait a minute.
Alphabet. I'm not talking about a language now. Give me what alphabet is this Bible written in Africa?
Well, we can tell you what it was translated
No,
to.
don't tell me the alphabet.
I wasn't there.
But then you can't make that statement. But anyway,
But you wasn't there
The
either.
culture.
I'm not saying
We
I
can
was.
see
I'm not
every-
saying you were. We're not talking about that. Who was there? We know none of us was there. We are.
Now, I'm
we
not
are-
talking about the Bible to defend
All
the stuff. Let's say this is the way I see the Bible. I see the Bible as part history, part mythology. But we got to know when to separate the history from the mythology. A lot of it is outright bullshit. A lot of it is
You're on
stuff
camera
that...
now.
Huh?
You're on camera.
Oh, I'm sorry. A lot of it is stuff that we stole
And here's
from
the
the Book of
lady.
the Dead. I'm sorry about that. Okay? But by the same token, we just can't just sweep the whole thing out and say it don't exist.
Okay, well, you're going to have to do that.
But if
want-
you do this,
if
you'll lose everybody who at least you got to try to reach
You
through.
know what I said to that? So sorry. But anyway, here's what you do. That's not what you do, Dr. Jeffrey.
Throw it out.
You have to throw it out. That's what you have to do. You have to do it. Now,
It's done every day. Even some of us think we're scholars. You go back to that Bible.
I always run back to
I've
the
had
Bible.
these discussions with him for a number of years, and I said, look, the Bible is not history.
Right.
There's nothing
But it's
wrong with
culture.
history.
It's not culture. Who's
There
culture?
are cultural similarities
No,
in
no.
that,
And
what I
no,
just showed you.
no.
Wait,
no,
here's
no,
here's
no.
what being his argument has been. I've been knowing this guy
That's
for
what my
27
book
years.
will show.
Let's deal with the Bible.
It's created more confusion
Right.
in the world.
Okay, I agree with, look,
Any
okay,
book,
wait.
You're right.
Thousands of books
Wait,
ever been
right.
published.
Now, what was my
Correct.
rationale for dealing with the Bible? Tell him what I told you.
Well, you seem to have thought if you blacken it up, you could.
No, you can't. You can't do it.
Wait a minute. Slow it down.
You can't.
Slow it down.
That's just the same.
Same thing. Go take a King James version.
What I told him. I said this. The people we are trying to reach is locked up in the Bible.
Uh-huh.
They're locked there.
Well, then you have to
And we
go.
got to reach them in a medium to make them for the first time challenge it.
No.
If you can show them that, wait,
I don't agree with that. But
no, look. We got to make them challenge the lie that they've been taught.
Well,
You
We're
have to
talking a
know the truth.
tactic now.
If the truth hurts you,
No.
so
They
sorry.
won't-
But everybody can accept
I
it.
don't
we
care
said
whether
the
they
truth will
accept it
set
or
you
not.
free or make you
Because you know
mad.
why?
Because to
that-
speak their language, you have to have a point of
A
reference.
reverence, that's all.
I have a point of reference. I'm giving you all the reference.
I mean, we go on church once a
No,
day.
I'll take you, put
How
you
do
in
you
the
get one
fire,
out to
burn
see
you,
the
and I'll be
see the
the
light?
No, they're not going to do that. You're talking about our people don't do that.
We're talking about people that say they want to
Okay.
be scholars.
Our people don't do that. Their
teachers.
spirituality won't do that. White folks do that. This book here I wrote is not for white folk or no other people. Now I want you to read. See right down here, Dr. Jeffries. Now, this is my book, The Historical Origin of Christianity. And down there at the caption says what now?
There has never been a man that ever walked the earth in human form of any race, creed, or color by the name of Jesus Christ.
Okay, in this book,
That says your book.
this is my book, written by Walter Williams and a revised edition. And I want Dr. Jeffries to read why the meta-nature hieroglyphics has never been deciphered. You read, Dr. Jeffries?
Why the Meta-Nature hieroglyphics have never been deciphered. Contrary to the teachings of Western institutions, the Metanetra or hieroglyphics, which are the picture symbols of the ancient Egyptians, have never been deciphered. The following are the reasons. 1. In order for the Metanetra or hieroglyphics to have been deciphered, one would have to have asked the ancient Egyptians who drew the symbols, what he/she meant for them to be. 2. To illustrate my point, I will draw a symbol of my own creation. And there are two concentrics on one beam in the drawing as the symbol.
I see it.
And I now ask, what is the meaning of this symbol? Realistically, you cannot know until I prove you with the meaning, provide you with the meaning. 3. No one can put a phonetic alphabetical value to symbols. For example, the symbol of the question mark. Can you assign a phonetic alphabet value such as the letter T to the question mark, M, P, K, or R, etc. to the question mark? The answer is no, because the question mark is telling you something to do, to question. 4. If you drive a car, you were tested in 3 categories: eyesight, rules of the road, and symbols. When you were tested for symbols, you were asked what the symbols were telling you to do. In order to know what the symbols are telling you to do, one has to know the meaning of the symbols as standardized by the Division of Motor Vehicles. If you do not know the meaning of the symbols, you fail the test. 5. Also, one cannot use any language, Coptic or otherwise, as a key to understanding the symbols of the hieroglyphs. Example, you cannot apply a language or languages to symbols that one does not know the meaning of. Next, it is impossible to reduce 400 or more symbols of the hieroglyphs to 26 letters of the alphabetical system. Next, what the Europeans did was to decipher which hieroglyphic symbols would be used to represent a given letter of the alphabet. Example, they matched the assigned letters of the alphabet to the hieroglyphic symbols of their choice. And then the statement that continues says, the arbitrary assigning of letters to symbols is evident with the acceptance of the pioneering work of J.J. Bartholomew, Count Sylvester of Sassy, Deciphering, Johann Acrebold, Thomas Young, and later Jean-Francois Champollion by the majority of Western academics.
All right, let's stop right
Right
here.
now, I can't stop. She's on the roll. Go ahead.
In 1822, Champollion, with the help of the works of Thomas Young and the Rosetta Stone, established a supposed system, theory, and principles for deciphering the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. His work at first was not accepted by other European scholars until another stone with bilingual inscriptions, the Decree of Canopus, Canopus, was discovered in 1866. This stone was believed to have confirmed the theories of Champollion. Questions. 1. After 44 years of widespread disagreement amongst the European scholars, how did the discovery of the stone of Canopus in 1866 confirm Champollion's theory and reading of the hieroglyphics? 2. Where is the original stone of Canopus? 3. Who discovered the Canopus stone? 4. How was the Canopus stone discovered? 5. Who validated the authenticity of the stone of Canopus? Champollion's accepted work on the hieroglyphs inspired Adolf Erman, E-R-M-A-N, then curator of ancient Egyptian artifacts at the Berlin Museum. Erman was a student of Carl Richard Lepsius, Lepsius, German Egyptologist, who encouraged him to publish a grammatical dictionary of the hieroglyphics in 1880. The dictionary was revived in 1925 and finished in 1934. Ehrman's work created a new pseudo-direction and language for the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. His works inspired and gave E.A. Wallace Budge a guideline to write his book entitled The Book of the Dead, or The Coming Forth by Day and by Night. I urge you to read this appendix over and over again until you understand the reasons why the Metanetra and hieroglyphics have never been deciphered. I will now conclude by quoting from the book, The Rosetta Stone, written for the British Museum by Carl Andrews. Carol Andrews. Quote, "It is not possible, strictly speaking, to compile an alphabet of hieroglyphic signs. For practical purposes, however, certain unilateral hieroglyphics have been selected to form a kind of alphabet which is universally used for the organization of dictionaries, word lists, index, and for general reference purposes," end quote.